Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the PLO Blueprint course. In today's video, I'm going to introduce season number 2, which will be covering 3-bet pots in position in great detail and talk about the course structure, the angle I'm going to take in terms of teaching methodology, and already introduce the first general frequencies when it comes to our first major board texture, which will be ace-high boards. To begin with, in this season, I'm going to focus a lot on practicality, and I'm also going to focus a lot on the later streets, so turn and river shifts, how to allocate your bluffs correctly, and also how to use the right bet sizing to leverage your stack size. When it comes to the differences I'm going to implement, I'm also going to focus a lot more on different stack sizes, so how to adjust from being 100 big blinds to 150 to 200 big blinds deep when it comes to flop, turn, river transition. And I also want to give you guys a lot of concepts to understand how to identify the right patterns within your hand to find the right bluffs in the right moment. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to, instead of work with a lot of PowerPoints, I'm going to work with a lot of practical hand examples and dive deep into those hand examples and ask a lot of what-if scenarios or what-if questions to create different scenarios. So we're first of all going to start off today by introducing the ace-high board texture, looking into an overview of frequencies and sizing preferences on the flop. And I'm also giving you hand examples to make it more clear when to use what kind of bet sizing. And then we're going to dive deeper into 5 different examples of different board textures, but also into different transitions. Starting off with ace-9-5 rainbow. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how to transition on a very dry board where we have a polarity advantage on the turn, which is a king, but also what would happen if the turn would be a different card or if we were deeper on the turn in terms of our bet size choice, but also in terms of our range composition. And then move on from one spot to the other in individual videos to showcase you different sides of exploration for flop, turn, river strategy and 3-bet pots. We're going to end up each individual board texture by going into a couple of quick spots at the end, which means I'm going to hover over some spots more superficially that I played in the past and then recap the most important concepts of each individual board in more detail. So for today's video, we're going to kick it off by looking into ace-high boards. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the post-flop shortcuts. You can download this file in the download section of the mastermind and talk a little bit about board textures that have an ace in them. So the most important rows here to pay attention to are the first 3 right over here, where you can see the board texture and the two-toned structure. So these boards are all holding a flush draw possibility, and then attach to them the overall c-bet frequency and the sizing preferences. You can see that we are c-betting at a very high frequency, almost 100% on almost all board textures, but the boards that have 2 lower cards like ace-7-4, ace-6-5, or ace-6-3, the main pattern here is that these cards are connected, and when we have the non-aces part of our distribution of our 3-bet range, so hands like Jack 10, 9, 8 double suited, we're going to whiff the board very hard, especially if we don't have a flush draw, and therefore we're going to tone it down with betting a little bit. On the other side, when you think about rainbow boards of similar structures like ace-7-3, ace-6-5, ace-6-3 rainbow, we're also not going to bet 100% on these boards, not only because we're whiffing with jack high or 10 high rundowns, but also because when we do have top set on ace-7-3 rainbow, we are very often going to get a fold in a situation where we don't want to get a fold. So we are going to tone down our c-bet frequency a little bit to around 75% on average on these lower board textures, but generally speaking, we're holding a very high c-bet frequency. And when it comes to bet size preferences, we are generally betting half pot at 100 big blinds. You can see the distribution right over here for two-tone boards, mainly half pot, unless the board is very connected and is also wet. So boards like ace-10-9 two-toned have a 21% potting frequency, or ace-10-7 two-toned 25%. On rainbow, this is not as often the case. Ace-8-7 rainbow has 19% potting range. So we are generally betting half pot. We're generally betting at a high frequency, unless the board has 2 low connected cards. Let's move into a little bit of a deeper breakdown when it comes to the general ideas on a couple of individual boards. First thing we're going to do is we're going to recap very quickly the general principles one more time, just to make sure that you really understand what the flop ideas are on ace-high boards. Again, the default is to c-bet half pot on the majority of the flops. If the board becomes very wet and dynamic, like ace-10-9 two-tone, for example, we should also implement the potting range with a small portion of our preflop range. And checking back is generally speaking quite rare. Only with 2 connected low cards on the board, you should have a checking range to begin with. We're going to start off here by looking first of all into a couple of hand examples to give you guys some visual overview of what hands generally make sense to pot, what hands belong into our betting range that is going to fold against the jam, and what hands are going to bet to stack off. In the deep dives, we're then moving over to turn and river, and also a lot of what if scenarios, so exchanging the variables, different turn cards, different river cards, different stack sizes, and so on. First board here is Ace Jack 9 two-toned. So going back to the post-flop shortcuts, we can see that on this board we have an overall c-bet frequency of 93%. That's not only because we have a lot of pocket aces in our pre-flop range, but also because the non-pocket aces part of our range is also going to interact with the board pretty nicely. We could have wraps and flush draws, for example, so very strong combo draws here. But also two pair like Ace Jack, Ace 9, that usually have an additional straight draw. So on this board, as we saw in the shortcuts, we should have a potting range and we should have a half potting range. Here are some examples of hands that are potting, and they are broken down into three major categories. First, we have vulnerable made hands that need the protection because they have no backup. So that would be a hand like top set, Ace, Ace, 3-4, with no flush draw, no backdoor flush draw, and no straight draw. Ace, Ace, Jack 5, again, no backup, blocking their own boat outs by holding a jack. Or Ace, King, King, Jack, top two pair with the future King of Spades blocker is also going to bet full pot because all these hands benefit a lot from making our opponent fold because they don't play as great on turn cards, but also they can charge the maximum as we are unblocking our opponent's draws. The second type of hands that are going to bet full pot are medium strong hands, made hands with additional equity. These hands lack in flush draw nuttiness and benefit from protection and don't mind winning the pot outright on the flop or getting all the money in. On the flop, hands like Ace 8, 7, 6. So here we have a top pair, a weak flush draw, and a weak straight draw. We don't necessarily want to build a pot slowly and play turns and rivers with a hand that has such a low nuttiness potential. Or Ace Queen 10, 8, so holding top pair and a wrap. Or Ace King 10, 7, similar story here to the Ace Queen 10, 8. Those hands are definitely good enough to get the money in, but they're not incentivized to incentivize our opponent to come along and play turns and rivers with us. And then lastly, the EV of your c-bet outweighs the EV of a check back. Although checking might look attractive, utilizing your range advantage to generate fold equity is highly beneficial with a hand that can stack off after potting and can even fold out better hands. So again, here we have medium strong hands. They are not holding as great of a made hand, but they are really benefiting a ton from applying pressure on a board where we do have a very strong range advantage. So bottom two pair, an open ender, for example, Jack 10, 9, 8, or Queen Jack 8, 6, which is middle pair, and a weak flush draw and a weak gut shot, as well as Queen, Queen, 10, 9, blocking a pair, open-ended straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and also blocking the stack-off range by holding two queens. These hands are generally benefiting from betting full pot. So you should think of, do you have a hand that can stack off? And if the answer is yes, you obviously want to bet. You want to bet anyway at a high frequency in this board. But if you want to stack off but you're not excited about it, then you should go ahead and pot very often. Next up, or if you're not excited about playing turn cards at a high SPR or high-ish SPR, then you should be potting. Then here we have examples of hands that are going to bet half pot and then stack off. So this is generally a stronger breed of hands that is playing better on turns when getting called. Number one, here we have the strongest made hands that are trying to induce. So Ace, Ace, King, Queen, top set, backdoor nut flush draw and nut gut shot. Ace, King, Queen, Jack. So here we have top two pair and a gut shot. Or Ace, Ace, 5, 4, top set and a flush draw. All those hands are very, very strong, and therefore they want to bet half pot to induce our opponents to continue. The second breed of hands is the best draws with backup. So again, here we benefit from keeping our opponent's range wide. We benefit also from the fact that if our opponent floats us, they might potentially bluff on certain cards because he's going to put us on pocket aces. So here we usually have a combination of straight draws and flush draws and can therefore perfectly realize our equity, basically no matter what the turn card is. Third, we have top pair with strong backup and decent runouts. So Ace, King, King, 7. So here we are basically looking to dominate our opponent's calling range, which is easier if we are betting smaller. So we're trying to get weaker flush draws along or weaker pair and straight draw combinations. Ace, 10, 8, 7. So here we have top pair, a wrap, and a flush draw, or Ace, King, Queen, 10, top pair, and the nut wrap. And then lastly, under pairs with strong backup bet half pot to stack off. King, king, 5-6, for example. King, king, queen 10, and queen, queen, 10, 8. Those hands sort of benefit the most from keeping our opponent's range as wide as possible, because then we do have the most equity. And the reason we are going to not pot these hands is because they have more playability in comparison to something like a bare top set without any backup. So those hands are betting half pot, and then they're going to stack off. And then lastly, we have the hands that are betting half pot and are folding versus a jam. And pretty much most of the weak combinations or hands that are not strong enough to stack off are basically belonging in this category, because we have such a high c-bet frequency on the ace-jack-9 board. Again, to recap that quickly, I think it's 93%. Yes, 93%. So a lot of the hands that are not strong enough to continue are going to bet to try to generate fold equity, but folding versus jam. For example, the best bet fold vulnerable mate hands that lack in equity against stack off ranges, for example, ace 10, 10, 9, this hand is not going to check back. It's not playing that great on turns. And we do have such a strong polarity advantage in the board that we do want to bet and then fold versus jam. Or a hand like bottom two pair here, queen, jack, 9, 7, is also going to bet and fold against the race. So some players play kind of passively and check back those kind of combinations, and they will very often end up losing the hand, even if they have the best hand, because they are making their check back range very vulnerable by including hands like these ones in there. Secondary, bet fold marginal top pair hands that lack the equity to stack off. So here we're not going to risk a full pot size bet. We're going to bet half pot and fold with ace queen queen 6 or ace king king 8 without a flush draw, straight draw, or ace 8 7 6, basically top pair combinations. Third, we have bet fold with little or no showdown value and low equity hands. Or low equity hands when our opponent jams on us. So for example, a bare flush draw here at the bottom, 8, 7, 6, 5. These are not hands you want to check back. These are hands that you are going to include into your betting range in order to fold versus jam, because you are crushing the board so hard. A hand like king, queen, jack 8 or jack 10, 7, 8 are also going to bet fold. And then lastly, bet fold with showdown value, with little backup to check back. So queen, queen, 8, 8 or king, king, 9, 8 are hands that are not really benefiting from a free card. So we're rather better off going for the bet fold. So that pretty much wraps up ace, jack, 9 and sort of an introduction. We're now going to dive deeper into specific boards and talk about transitions to the turn, which are much more difficult to handle than flop c-bet frequencies and sizings. But you pretty much have the scoop now of what you can expect in this course, and also how to play ace-high boards on the flop. We're going to continue now with ace 9-5 rainbow and talk about multi-street strategy.